Good evening, all, and welcome. Are you sitting comfortably? Comfortably in your home, no doubt. But is your home safe? And are you alone? Could there be someone else there? Could your home have been broken into? You never know until it's too late. I must be mistaken. There's probably no one in your house. Probably. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mum separated from my stepdad in early 2013, when I was 17. He had already threatened to kick me out of his home for a multitude of reasons. Anything from violating curfew to being bisexual. And really, I wasn't a bad kid. All I did was work and go to school. So I moved out with my mum and agreed to pay a third of the rent, or about $400 a month. At the time, I made $7.50 an hour to get verbally abused by customers and flip burgers. And I worked around 20 to 25 hours per week. Plus, I went to school. Plus, I kind of had a social life. So usually on any given week, I was home for about 2 evenings, and out otherwise. My mom was pretty lenient with me, since I was paying rent, so my curfew was usually between 12 to 2:30. And my mum worked full-time at a Wawa that was 45 minutes away. She was also in school and had a boyfriend that lived a town over. She was home about as often as I was. We had a cat, and it was just us. This apartment that we had used to be a barn. It split into 4 apartments, 2 on both floors, and it has an inaccessible attic and a basement that is creepy as hell. It's off the main road, a ways back down a driveway, in an open field with a few other ancient buildings around it, and not much else besides trees. Initially, we took comfort in this, but then it got weird. Like, really weird. There was a closet in her bedroom that locked from the inside, and randomly, it would be locked. Same with the pantry. Small things would be moved, and more and more. We noticed that we were missing things. Things would happen by themselves. Did you smoke a bowl out of my grinder? When did you eat all of the Cheez-Its? How did the cat flip over the litter box? It was eerie. But it was right outside of a civil war zone, a major one. And it was said to have been the bloodiest battle outside of Gettysburg. It was so dumb, but at first we thought it was a ghost. Or we thought it was the other person. Obviously it was a tense and weird time. I was getting sick of my mum smoking my weed. So before I left work one day, after she had left work too, I set up a simple string trap that would snap when she opened the door. I wanted to know for sure whether it was her, and that we didn't have a pothead poltergeist floating around the house. An hour before my shift ends, my mum calls me to tell me that she needs to cover another shift, so she will be doing a double, and asked if I had enough bus money to get home. I did, so I went home. To my surprise, the string trap had been tripped. I was again missing a pinch of weed. I was so sober and beyond explainably paranoid. My chest was starting to feel tight with anxiety, and I grabbed the pepper spray out of my bag. As I left the room, I heard feet shuffling above my head, and my heart dropped. I might have even shit myself. I grabbed the paraphernalia, set it somewhere safe outside, and bolted for the house, and rang to the Burger King across the street as I dialed 911. After a little while, the police showed up, and I was beginning to feel like I definitely overreacted. I felt so stupid. I wanted to tell Officer Jones to go home, but I changed my mind. But I did feel better when they told me that they would go search my house, and one of them stayed outside to wait with me while the other searched for footsteps. I'm on the phone with my mum, who's a mixture of pissed and concerned, telling her that it's probably all good and that I'm sorry for scaring her. But then as the door to the house swings open, I can hear a struggle, and I walk to see it better. A police officer and a husky bearded man are wrestling at the foot of the stairs. Just in front of the door, the bearded guy is holding onto the doorknob with one hand. I was so shocked and afraid, I had to hang up the phone. The bearded man gets away and makes a sharp left across the patio, over the short wooden fence, and into the field with all of the trees in it. He is gone into the night, and the officers disappear after him, only to return to tell me he got away. They did a thorough sweep of the house, and they found his semen around the drain of the shower, as well as, oh God no, on our loofahs and razors, and discovered that the pantry had an attic drop-down door that was painted over, that this man had chipped at to get inside long before we showed up. He'd been squatting there since summer. When people moved in, he took to hiding in the attic, the pantry, or the closet, and he came out when they weren't home. He ate our food, and the officers didn't know, but he smoked our weed, and he probably had a bond with our cat. If he didn't actually see me have sex, he definitely heard it. And seriously, who wanks into a razor blade? Ew. It just makes me want to die to this day, whenever I think about it. My mum's boyfriend moved in with us shortly after, and I was home even less. To this day, I am paralyzed with fear when I hear a strange noise like the house setting. I keep mace on me always, everywhere, at all times. This guy wasn't even violent, I guess, but just the idea that he wanked his free willy onto my loofah makes me feel unsafe in a profound way. I saw the other signs, I acknowledged them, and I ignored them like a real idiot. Thanks for listening. Don't ever be ashamed of calling the police when you think you're in trouble, even if it's just a hunch. And even if you've got to hide the weed first, it will at least make you feel better to have a patrol car parked outside. This is some urban legend type shit, but it wouldn't be if it didn't happen. And it actually happens. About 10 years ago, I was 18 or 19, and had just moved out of my mum's for the first time. I had a job as a barista, so I wasn't making much money, and had to settle on a shitty studio apartment. My sister used to joke with me that the building looked like an old insane asylum turned apartment complex. Needless to say, I didn't have the most classy high-end neighbours, but rent was cheap, and it was on the bus line close enough to my mum's house, so it worked for me. One night, I was home watching TV. It was around 11:30 p.m, and I heard a knock at my door, which was odd because the apartments were all secured entry, and if you didn't have a key, you have to buzz in the manager, and they'd have to unlock the door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw an older black lady fidgeting. I grew up in the suburbs, so I have zero street smarts and was very naive. I open the door part, and she immediately starts rambling that she needs to borrow my phone to call a cab. She starts talking about how she needs to get over to her sister's house because someone was sick, etc., etc. All this time, she is trying to look around me to see into my apartment. I got this overwhelming feeling that something wasn't right, and told the lady I didn't have a phone set up in my apartment yet. I told her that there was a payphone down the street a couple of buildings over, and when I tried to close the door, she pushed me back a bit to try and get her foot in the way, in order for me not to close it. She started rambling again. She didn't have any change and she needed to use the restroom. Her poor family / friend / pet needed her there as soon as possible. The whole time, she's twitching and fidgeting around, and I finally managed to push her out the door frame and shut the door in her face. She knocked a few more times, and then ended up wandering off. Now, all of that would have been creepy enough, except that 10 minutes later, I hear a thump at one of the windows. Like I said, the apartment was cheap, so they just had windows and no screens. I went over to look, and I see the same lady standing on the ground, but she's now with another dude. And he has set up a ladder against the side of the building. I was on the second floor, so the ladder easily reached my window, and the guy started climbing up the ladder towards me. I opened the window and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing, and that's when I saw he had a hammer in one hand. Without thinking, I grabbed the top of the ladder and pushed it back. You'd be surprised how hard it is to top over a ladder with someone climbing it. Nothing like the Tom and Jerry cartoons. He managed to jump off it before it fell, and they both stood at the bottom of the window, yelling at me, calling me a stupid bitch, and that they only wanted to use my phone. Yeah, of course. That's when I picked up my phone and started to call the police. Once they saw that, they both hightailed it out of there. When the police came, I filed a report, but they were never caught. They never came back, but it still creeps me out thinking about what would have happened to me if I'd have let that lady in. I am a female in my early 20s. I'm a scrawny little thing, and I live alone with my 3-year-old daughter. We live in a 3-bedroom home with a large back section and a long driveway. One of the rooms is used for storage, and my daughter is slowly transitioning into sleeping into her own bedroom. On this particular night, she had a nightmare and had crawled into bed with me. I myself am utterly terrified of everything, so I absolutely hate living by myself. I get freaked out by the slightest of noises outside at night, and they tend to keep me awake for at least an hour and a half, while I try to determine whether or not it will be a threat. It never is. I am just horribly paranoid. Because of this paranoia, I will make sure all the doors and windows are locked and secured before I go to bed each night. This happened a couple of days after Christmas. It was around 1 a.m. Nothing unusual for me. I am quite the night owl, and I began hearing noises outside. I assumed it was a possum, as I'd been having problems with them recently, but turned the laptop volume down to listen just in case. My paranoid mind was informing me that since it was just after Christmas, someone might be trying to break in to steal presents. I heard scurrying in the grass, which went on for a while, back and forwards, at the rear end of the house. I figured it was a bit strange that the possum wasn't making its god-awful noises as usual. And that's when the rattling started. The rattling started in the kitchen and moved round to my daughter's room. Then it went to mine, and then finally to the lounge. Someone was trying the windows. I grabbed my phone and slid out of bed, pressing my back up against the bedroom door. I could hear someone talking outside, which made me figure that there was more than one person. As I was dialing emergency services, I heard a footstep in my house. At this point, my heart was thumping so loud that my breaths came out in the same pattern. I'm on the phone with the emergency services and trying to listen to what's going on, with my back pressed up against the door, fearing that the door handle would turn at any moment, and I'd be pushed along the ground as they forced the door open. There were still footsteps inside. I didn't know if it was just the noises of the house, or if whoever it was outside and had managed to get in. They were coming from my daughter's room, which is right next to mine. My daughter, by the way, is quite happily sleeping, oblivious, in my bed while I'm on the phone with the operator, and completely freaking out. I was trying my best to keep quiet on the phone, as I knew the people outside my window were right next to my room. I'm not sure if they heard me or the phone, or if they had just given up, but they had disappeared before the police arrived. I was terrified to step outside my room when I heard them at the door, in case the people were inside of my house, waiting for me. My bedroom door and the front door are only a couple of steps away from each other, but that didn't make it any less scary as I threw it open and ran to the front door to unlock it. One of the officers stayed inside with me, checked the house and took my statement, while the others checked around the outside. They both said they couldn't find anything, and asked me to describe the voices. It was a male's voice, Indian accent, and I told them he was either crazy talking to himself, or that there was more than one person outside. I told them I thought he had managed to get inside at one point, but since the police had done a walk around, perhaps it was just my mind freaking out. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night, and as soon as the sun rose, I was throwing open all the curtains, and the lounge was the last place I went. As I opened the final curtain, I saw the lock on the window was open, and there was a dirty footprint on the windowsill, and more dirt smeared on the carpet. I did a thorough check of the house. Nothing was taken, and nothing was out of place. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought the voice may have belonged to my ex. We're in court at the moment, because he did some insidious things to my daughter. That's a story for another time. Access was taken away from him, and he, or rather, my aunt, shall I say, pushed him to take it to court, and things have been a bit sour there. If it was him, I'm terrified to think of what he wanted. He was physically and sexually violent towards me. But the fact of the matter is, he didn't even try my room. He went straight for my daughter, which is even more worrying, as I'll never let him even go remotely near my house. So how did he know where he was going? What did he want? And what did he want to do to my daughter? What would have happened if she hadn't have had that nightmare and come crawling into my bed that night? I shudder to think about it. All that I know is that I don't want to find out, and I hope that the court rules in our favour, and we never have to see that sicko again. This happened to me in 2008 in Las Vegas. I was living with my husband and our son, who was about 2 years old at the time. Well, I would frequently take our son to the grocery store early evening with me to do some shopping and give my husband some alone time. I never really worried. The store was literally right outside my neighborhood. Not to mention I lived in a pretty decent neighborhood. I finished my shopping and put my son in his car seat, and by the time I finished loading the car, he was passed out. So I decided to quickly fill my tank at the gas station on the other side of the parking lot. While I was pumping gas, a big truck pulls up on the opposite side of my pump. The man pumps his gas and seems to take no notice of me and leaves. As I'm finishing up, the truck suddenly pulls up next to my car, and a man who looks like he loves his meth says, "Excuse me, miss, but I just felt compelled to tell you how beautiful you are. As a matter of fact, the only reason I came to get gas here is because I saw you come here from the grocery store, and I just had to be near you. I've been trying to get the courage to approach you for a while." I was flattered, thanked him for the compliment, but quickly informed him I was off to the market. He responded, "I know it was worth a shot," and began to pull off. Suddenly, he backed up and said, "If you tell your husband what I said, I'll kill him." And then he drove off. Needless to say, this freaked me out, so I immediately called my husband, and he told me not to come home directly, in case the guy were to follow me. So I drove around until I felt that I'd lost him, and then I went home. My husband and I went over it again and again and again. How could he possibly kill my husband if he doesn't know him or where we live? Then, some of the things he said started to ring in my head, like how he'd been watching me at the grocery store. I started to think, how long, how many days had he seen me there? How I told him I was married, and he said he knew. Is it possible that he'd followed me home on previous occasions? We put extra locks on the doors, and took extra precautions, and tried to forget about it. He was probably just some crazy guy, right? Well, about a week later, at around 8 or 9 p.m., my husband decided to run up to the gas station to get cigarettes. I was sitting on the computer in our dining room as he left through the garage door, with our son sleeping in his bedroom on the other side of the house. A minute after he left, I heard the garage door in the laundry room open and somebody come in. I immediately assumed it was my husband, grabbing something that he forgot. I called out to him and got no response. So I called his name again and received no answer, but could hear someone moving around in the laundry room. Then I started to worry. All the guns in the house were in our room, and I would have to walk right past the laundry room to get to them. Suddenly, I heard my 2 pit bulls from my room start growling. Both dogs started barking viciously and ran towards the laundry room, at which point I heard the laundry room door open and the garage slam shut very quickly. At that point, I grabbed my phone and ran into my son's room and called my husband to ask him if he had just returned home for something. To my horror, he said that he was at the gas station, and I told him that someone was in the house, but I think the dogs had scared him out. He instructed me to stay in our son's bedroom with the door closed, and that he was on his way home. So I sat in the dark next to my sleeping son in terror. 2 minutes later, I heard the dogs barking and someone come into the house again through the garage door. After what felt like forever, my husband came into my son's bedroom, and he checked the entire house, all around our property, but could find no one. We came to the conclusion that the stalker from the gas station must have finally taken his opportunity to catch me alone, and based on what the creepy tweaker had said to me, who else could it have been? What really freaked me out is not knowing how long he'd been watching me for before that. How long he had been watching me before he approached me at the gas station, and before he came into our home. It really opened my eyes, that someone could stalk you without you even knowing about it, until it's too late. I believe my 2 pit bulls saved my life, my son's life, and possibly my husband's too that night. Had my husband not let the dogs in the house before he left, I probably wouldn't be here right now, and neither would my son. And to this day, any time I have to be home alone, or my husband and I are sleeping, I have my pit bulls inside to watch over me. I thank God every day for my pit bulls, and the unconditional love and protection that they provide me and my family. When I was 15 years old, I used to live in this house that was very close to the highway and at the start of a neighborhood. This house had previously been broken into, and months later, a drug deal gone bad left evidence in the alleyway. None of my family members were in the house when either events occurred, but I was home alone for this occurrence. This house was complete with a new security system, since we had the other break-in, so I felt very safe. Now, just to understand the layout of the house, the living room was connected to the backyard door. The door was actually a large glass panel bifold, and on the other side of it was a heavy-duty barred gate. Now, I was used to being home alone at 15. Not a big deal. I was in the living room with one of my dogs, and we were chilling just watching TV. I noticed my dog kept glancing at the glass door, but didn't think much of it until I heard the rustling outside. My dog immediately got up, went to the window and began growling. I thought perhaps it was a raccoon or something that got into the backyard, so I got up to check it out. As soon as I approached the window, a man lunged against the barred metal gate. At this point, the security alarms started going off. While they were blaring, the man screamed at me, "I just want to get to know you!" I immediately ran into the next room where the alarm was, and the house phone rang. The security system was calling to make sure everything was okay, and I told them a man was trying to break in. While I was on the phone, the man kept shouting at me from the back door to let him in. I was too scared to move. I didn't turn off the alarm because I was practically pissing myself on the floor. The alarm was still going off, but the commotion the man was making stopped. Minutes passed, and I heard the front door unlock, and the alarm was still blaring, and I was in the floor in tears. Thankfully, someone came home. I told my sister what happened. She turned off the alarm and tried to console me. When the police came by, I described the man as best I could. I told them where he was, banging on the barred gate and glass panelled door, and there they found a pretty large hunting knife that he left behind near the gate. The police got a couple of fingerprints, and the man turned out to be in the system. We found out that he was a schizophrenic homeless man registered on a couple of assault charges, and had not one, not two, but 3 restraining orders. Schizo homeless man, I hope you got the help you needed, but please, don't ever come back to my house, and let's not meet again. This happened last November, at my student house at university. The house is shared with 3 other people, 2 males, 2 females, and is a pretty standard semi-detached house in a nice enough area. It was about 1 in the morning, and everyone was in the house. Myself and the 2 male housemates were in the living room, which faces onto the street. We were playing on the PS3, and the other female housemate was upstairs in her room. We were having a good time, laughing and chatting, when suddenly we heard a disturbance that seemed to be coming from the house next door, the one that we're attached to. Since that house was also occupied by students, or boys, we just thought they were being rowdy or having a bit of an argument. My housemate Toby peeked out of our front window to see if he could see what was going on next door. Then he suddenly drew his head back, saying that someone stood on the pavement had been looking at him. We didn't think anything of it, and carried on playing our game, when suddenly we heard a huge crash behind us, and turned to see someone slamming their foot against our window and screaming at us. We all jumped to our feet, and I heard our other housemate coming downstairs to see what all the commotion was about. A second later, there was a huge slamming sound against our front door, clearly someone trying to break through it, and a man's voice shouting at us to open the door. By this point, I will admit that I was absolutely crapping myself. The noises at the front door stopped, and we heard the guy heading around the side of the house. My blood ran cold. The back door led into the kitchen, and the kitchen had 2 doors to it, one leading to the hallway and the living room, and the other to the spare room. The living room and the spare room were also connected by a door, so there were 2 exits from each room. We all ran into the spare room, which had French doors that led out into the back garden. That was where most of the picnics happened. We didn't know where to go. We didn't know where the intruder was, whether he was in the house or in the back garden. Toby opened the French doors and crept into the garden to have a look. I followed. My other housemate Lucy opened the door that was connected to the kitchen, and for some strange reason saw the intruder and then slammed the door closed. The intruder now knew where we were. My other male housemate Mike then held the door closed and put all his weight against it. Lucy ran to the living room and then disappeared. The intruder then began kicking the door that Mike was holding shut, until he kicked it so hard that Mike was flung from the door. Us 3 remaining housemates then ran into the garden and did some real parkour shit, jumping over the fence into our neighbour's garden. We ran over to his patio, and luckily Mike was smart enough to pick up his phone in the panic and call the police. I was gently knocking on the patio door asking for help from the neighbour, hoping that he was downstairs and could hear us. Whether he heard us or not, he never came. Mike hung up his phone and said that the police were on their way. There was a noise at the fence, and we all ducked down as low as possible, but there was nothing to hide behind, and the intruder rolled over it. It was dark in the garden, but we could see him quite plainly. If he looked towards the house, he would have been looking straight at us. Luckily for us, there was a party in a house that was diagonally across from the garden, and I think the intruder thought that we headed that way, so he carried on over and jumped the fence, going towards the party. We crouched frozen for a few minutes, The adrenaline had made my arms and legs like jelly. We were unsure whether to head back to the house, because for all we knew, there could have been other intruders who came with the first guy. We had to go back though. Lucy was still in the house, and we needed to make sure she was okay. Toby went over the fence first, and I tried to follow, but my legs were too much like jelly, and I couldn't climb over. After a few minutes, Mike was able to help me get over, and we went back to his house. There were no other intruders in the house, and the police arrived fairly quickly. We eventually found Lucy hiding in her bedroom wardrobe. There was blood on the living room window, where the intruder had cut himself breaking through the first window layer, and there was blood on the front door and the back door, and smeared on the wall in the kitchen, as well as there being dents in the door leading to the spare room. Because the intruder had followed us over the fence, we were able to give a fairly accurate description of him, and said that he might be at the party round the corner. The police went there, and asked if anyone suspicious was there. Apparently they'd all pointed to a man that said he just rolled over the fence. Bingo. The lads that lived next door came round to see if we were okay, and said the same thing had happened to them, except their back door was locked, and he hadn't been able to get in. This was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Upon reflection though, since there was only one guy, we would have most likely been able to overpower him. We hadn't known at the time how many there were, so we didn't want it to come to a confrontation. It turned out he was so high on coke that he would have made any confrontation very dangerous, especially if he had any hidden weapons. The man was arrested and charged, and he was made to pay for any damages to our house and to the student's house next door. Getting to sleep became very difficult after this. Any slight noise was someone trying to get in my head anyway. Eventually it passed and I began to feel more safe. During the Easter break, or spring break in the US I guess, we were broken into again, but nobody was in the house this time. The strange thing about this break-in was that none of the valuable stuff was broken. There was a projector, 2 PS3s and a Wii in the living room, and there were computers in every bedroom, and other electronics in Mike's room. Nothing was taken. Only a spare mobile or cell phone, clothes, and some jewellery were taken from Lucy, which made it look like more of an attack on her than anything else. Both of these break-ins happened within one academic year, and made me feel vulnerable inside houses now, whether it be my parents' home or my student house. I'm moving back into this same student house at the end of September. Wish me luck. My husband works nights sometimes. His shifts rotate, 7 AM to 9 PM. 7 PM to 9 AM. That sort of thing. I wasn't too bothered by it until the other night. We live in a fourplex, 1 beside and 2 behind, all on a single level. Since I'm not working yet, I'm pretty familiar with the comings and goings of my neighbours. Heck, I even know what everyone's cars sound like. It was probably just after midnight, and I was talking to some friends over Skype, when I heard the door handle jiggling. At first I thought maybe my husband was home early, and got up to greet him, then quickly realised I hadn't heard his work boots on the gravel, or his car. I went really still and kept listening, just in case I was mistaken. Finally, I yelled, "Hello?" There was just silence. Then I heard something in the lock. My husband likes me to be protected, so he brought us a couple of guns. I grabbed the shotgun and pumped it once. It's loud enough without putting ammo in that you know what it is really quickly. Then I yelled, "I have a gun and I know how to use it. Get lost before I call the police." Big heavy footsteps ran off our gravelled lot, and I stayed up the remainder of the night until the sun came up, when I finally fell asleep. My husband came home later that morning, and I was worried when he found me in bed at 11 a.m, but let me sleep a little longer once I explained what happened. The next day we had off, so we went to visit some friends of his. When we got back, we discovered the pumpkins I had next to the stoop were all knocked over, like someone was looking for a key. My husband did a quick sweep of the house before we went in, but we're looking for a new place now. I don't have good vibes there anymore. About a year ago, my parents and I were offered to stay a week in a friend's cottage in northern Michigan. Of course, we accepted the offer and packed up our things and brought our Great Dane with us. About 5 days into the stay, my parents went a few towns away to hit some bars and have fun. I didn't mind because I like being alone a lot of the time. At about 12:30, my parents weren't home yet, and my dog starts flipping out. He was running all over the house, growling and barking. Naturally, I'm scared shitless. I grabbed my pocket knife and barricaded the bedroom door. For about 10 minutes, my dog continues barking. When my dog stops barking, I get a call from my parents. They say they're too drunk to drive home, and they're gonna stay at a motel nearby. I don't get a minute's sleep that night, and when I decide it's safe enough to get up, I notice something that chilled me to the bone. The screens to my bedroom windows were cut. I burst out of my room and see that every screen in the cottage is cut. What I think happened is that someone creepy decided to try and break into the cottage through the doors originally. Since I'm careful about security, I made sure that they were locked, and after the creep was unsuccessful with the doors, he cut the screens and tried to get in through the windows. It had been a hot night that night, so before my parents left, they turned on the AC, and I locked the windows. I assumed that he made some sort of noise that woke up my dog, causing my dog to freak out. Then the creep must have left. I called my parents and then called the cops. They sadly didn't find any traces of the guy, and as soon as they were done with the investigation, my family and I got the hell out of there. I should start out by saying that this happened in the year 2002. Also, certain areas down south can be unsafe. I was staying with my mom at the time in the small town of Enterprise, Mississippi, just off Highway 11. For those of you who don't know the area, it's out in the sticks, surrounded by nothing but deep woods. It was pretty early in the morning, around 2 or 3. All the kids are asleep in the living room, while my mum and I were watching Jeepers Creepers in her bedroom. The movie ended, and my mum went to the bathroom. She came out of the bathroom, and after a few minutes, with an uneasy expression on her face, I asked her what was wrong. She told me that she heard people walking outside, and a clanking noise. Of course, I think that she's just trying to scare me, because we're watching a scary movie. I look at her and said, "Yeah, okay, now you're just messing with me." I laughed at her and she turned her head again, still standing in the doorway to the bathroom, listening intensely, turning back at me. Her expressions went from uneasy to fearful within seconds, and said, I mean it seriously. She told me to come here, and at this point, she was whispering. That's when I became uneasy. So I got up and walked into the bathroom. Within a few seconds, I started hearing walking outside, along with a sound I can only describe as metal on metal. I heard constant clinks, a pause, and then more clinks, and my heart dropped to my stomach. The only adults were my mother and I. My little brother, being the oldest male, was 13, and my children were all 5 and under. The clanking sounded to be distant, so I walked into the kitchen and living room area. I stood there listening to the sound as it was getting louder, but I wasn't quite to where it was at. So I went down the hallway, and it got louder still. I walked into my brother's bedroom. I stood there in the darkness and heard it. My heart at this point is still pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. My body starts shaking. I know what I have to do. I have to look out the window, right where I hear the banging. I tiptoe over to there and peek out of the shades. I couldn't really see anything, so I opened up the shades, and my worst fears were confirmed. All of a sudden, I see this massive man stand up quickly, although I can only see his silhouette and no facial details. I know we were looking eye to eye. This man had to be at least 6 foot. He was broad, had big shoulders, stout, and was a solid, massive man. Mind you, my mum is 4'6", and I'm barely 4'3", and I'm having to stare down this man? The only thing I knew to do was to scream at the top of my lungs for my mother to hand me the gun and call the cops. I ran as fast as I could to her room to get the gun, loaded it, and was standing in the living room with the gun pointed towards the hallway. If he was going to come in, if he meant to do me and my family harm, he had to go through me, and I wasn't going down without a fight. I was going to protect my family to my last breath, and I'm a damn good shot. One of the good qualities of being a good old southern country gal in the woods. You can do a lot of target practice. The kitchen was right behind me, and I could hear them breaking into there. I told my mama to stay in the kitchen close to me, but face her room in case they tried there. My mother stayed on the phone until the cops arrived, and my little brother and baby started to wake up at this point. They asked what was going on, and somehow in a calm voice, I told them that everything was okay, and to play the quiet game, and to get into a group and stay on the couch with Uncle, and not to move unless you were told to. The cops took half hour to get there. One took my mum's and my information down, while the other looked around the property. The 2 guys were long gone. The cop came back in and said they saw no footprints nor signs of breaking and entering. I was pissed at this point. I knew it was raining, so he probably didn't want to deal with it. I know what I saw. I know there had to be footprints, as it had been raining for 3 days now. I made sure to make a mental note on what kind of boots they were wearing. The cops left about 25 minutes or so after. Needless to say, I wasn't going to sleep. I told my mama that she could get some sleep. I made coffee and waited until daylight. Once it was daylight, I went outside. I looked around my mama's bathroom and saw footprints near the back window, where it looked like someone had been standing for a good minute, due to the groove in the mud. and it looked to be a good shoe size 7 or 8. I could see the cop boot print, and I also saw the screen had mostly been ripped off the bathroom window. I became enraged, because the cop never said anything about that, nor even asked. I noticed a path of shoe prints, and another set, the whole length of the way back to the trailer. Then I turned the corner, where the clinking sound was, and where I saw the massive man and huge footprints. He had to be size 12. The metal crane was smashed to pieces, and the screen cut off, and the window was broken a little. My heart sunk down into my stomach again, and for the first time, fear hit me. The realization of how close they were to breaking in, how close my family were of imminent danger. I stayed with my mum for a while after the incident. Even though it's been forever ago, I still get quite nervous opening blinds, and at times I see the man in my dreams. The silhouette of him will forever be burnt into my memory. So, to the silhouette of the man, let's never meet again. I was talking with my father a couple of weeks ago, and we were chatting about the house that my parents and I lived in when I was younger. I was going on about how I thought it was haunted, and would hear noises above me when I was in the basement. Pretty much just a paranoid kid. My parents got divorced not long after we moved into that house, and my mum decided she would keep the house, so we lived there with her the majority of the time. My mum and dad remained close, and if she ever needed help, he would be right there to help her, as we all lived in the same town. Well, onto the story. My mom would call my dad every now and then and say that she heard some noises outside of her room. For a visual, she lived on the main floor, and her bedroom was right by the living room. My younger sister's room was right across the hall, and my other sister and I's room were downstairs. So anyway, my dad would come over and investigate, and just conclude that it was probably just the house settling. But my mom, living alone, and with 3 kids under the age of 10 to protect, just wanted to be sure every time. One night, my mum started hearing noises again, and at first she thought it was the same old noises. And when she started to listen a little closer, she just knew it wasn't the same. She was hearing footsteps in the living room and walking by her bedroom door. There was someone there, and she knew it. So she called my dad on the phone and asked him to please come over, because there was someone in the house for sure this time. My dad was a police officer, so he booked it into the house with his equipment and found my mum in her room scared out of her mind. He calmed her down and went to check out the rest of the house and make sure that us kids were okay. So he walked around the main floor checking closets and came to the back door, which led right down the stairs to the basement, and found it wide open. I know it's not a very good ending, but it scares the shit out of me, knowing that someone was actually in our house in the middle of the night, and probably had been in our house multiple times before as well. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's installment of Scary Stories. I, for one, am always quite scared of people breaking into my home. When I was younger, I always used to make sure that I'd lock every door, personally, and close every door within the house, so that if someone were to break in, I'd hopefully be able to hear them. Unfortunately though, I'm an extremely heavy sleeper, so, I would have never heard them anyway. But always remember to keep your doors and windows locked, because you never know who might want to try and make entry into your home next. I'm sure you guys will be fine though. If you enjoyed tonight's video, please don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, as it goes a long way. And why not hit the subscribe button and press the little bell icon to be up to date every time I post. I post nightly at almost the same time, in order to make sure that you have horrors waiting for you when you go to sleep. But for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.